Yeah, and I think they're live.
Brilliant. Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:02 p.m. and I'd like to start the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and live streamed on the Council's website. It will also be available on the Council's YouTube channel later on this week. I would also like to remind members and officers to mute their microphones when not speaking. The purpose of this committee is to discuss and make recommendations in relation to the environmental, economic and social aspects of the Lower Thames Crossing. And with that, I'll move on to the agenda. Number one, apologies for absence. Lucy, do we have any apologies this evening?
No, none received.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the last meeting. I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 14th December 2020 to be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much the accuracy of the minutes because they were corrected, but I have asked for the economic mitigation list to be updated in reference to the green areas. I think it was L16. You have to forgive me. I haven't actually got the pack with me, so I'm looking at it online behind. Also, from the minutes, I was expecting to see an update on the health impact assessments in the work programme for the March meeting. So please, could that be added to the March meeting work programme as requested?
Yeah, we'll go into the work programme later, so if we can make a note to talk about that later on, that'd be fantastic. The sort of health impact report, like a further assessment, Councillor Muldowney, is that?
At the last meeting, I think Anna said that the health impact assessment had been received now and the team would be working on it, and we should expect an update in March once they'd had time to analyse that and update. So obviously that's a very important part of what we're looking at here, the health of our residents. So I don't want that to be left up on the work programme going forward.
Absolutely, I'll make that. We'll bring it up in the work.
Chair, yeah, let's talk about it at the end because there's a whole review of the whole DCO application that needs to be underway, and obviously our public health team are extremely challenged at the moment with what's going on with the pandemic and indeed more particularly locally in Thurrock. So we might have to have a degree of flexibility with that. I agree with Councillor Muldowney that it is incredibly important, but yeah, we need to be mindful that the team doesn't have any spare capacity or resource at the current time.
Okay, we'll bring that up later on in the agenda. Moving on to item 3, urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? No, can't see any hands raised. So moving on to item 5, Highways England. This is a presentation. Matt Palmer will be presenting for us with an update to the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. Matt, thank you very much for this.
Chair, if I can just interject by way of introduction. So Matt Palmer is the new Exec Director for the Lower Thames Crossing. If you remember, we talked previously in previous meetings about changes in structure at Highways England and the fact that they had separated the Lower Thames Crossing away from the complex infrastructure projects. Matt Palmer now reports directly into Jim O'Sullivan, the Chief Executive of Highways England, so LTC sits on its own on the Highways England structure. So the idea was that Matt came along here today to introduce himself because members of the task force will have heard me talk before about the change in approach and the renewed relationship between ourselves and Highways England, and very much more collaboration and in listening mode from Highways England, which is, I'm sure you'll all agree, is much welcome. So Matt was going to just introduce himself, and then actually it's the wider team that's going to present on a design update. And we've also got Steve Plum from the council present today, who has been working closely with Highways England on those design elements to comment or add support or otherwise to the presentation. So I'll hand over to Matt Palmer.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Anna. Yes, I'll hand over to Matt and we'll have some questions later. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anna. You've just completely stolen my thunder because I was going to explain most of that, but thank you for introducing me. So yes, I joined the programme about 5 and a bit months ago from Heathrow. As Anna says, we've reorganised the Highways England to really allow a greater focus on this programme that it needs, if I'm honest. But just a bit about me so you can understand where I'm coming from. I am ex-Heathrow. I used to run the programme on the 3rd runway out at Heathrow. And my approach has always been in national infrastructure to make sure that we do take on board the voices of the local councils, local people, local businesses, etc. You get a much stronger project for doing that. You get a much better project. So my whole sort of being around infrastructure is about how we can better work together. And yeah, I say this to many of the local authorities we affect. The reality is, we need to together we can do something better here. We might not like it, but we can definitely do something better. So my team is on listening mode. But we now need to move to action mode. So you very helpfully, and I think it's further on your agenda to talk through the economic benefit, the Hatch report, and Gary's going to explain our approach to it. But I think it's really helpful if you're quite focused on what you think you want from us, and we can then respond. But we can also, bring ideas, etc. But for me, it is about how we work together to get a better outcome for both. And I suppose the last thing is I'm not a highways engineer. I'm not a highways England sort of long-term representative. So I look at this much more as national infrastructure than I do as a road, and therefore I'm trying to look at it on a local benefit as much more than just a road. And we need to try and lift the way we've described it on HE's side to be much more about what does it mean for Thurrock and for good and for bad. And really, what's that mean for the local community? What does it mean for you as a homeowner in the locality, and all that good stuff? So I am trying to shift the focus, and hopefully over time you will see that change. I was going to hand over to Gary and Claire to then go through the presentation. I think Gary's got the first bit, which is really talking about the economic report and our response to it and how we're moving. I don't know if you'd like to ask questions of me now, or we can just answer them as we go through.
Yeah, I think if we just pause and see if there is any questions in between presenters, just so no questions get lost. So if anyone's there is already a hand raised. Councillor Spielman.
Hello, yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you for that. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. In that previously, and unfortunately, I think it's due to the way the scheme's been designed, there hasn't really been any benefit to Thurrock to be sold, and there's been no effort from your colleagues to try and sell that benefit either, which is why it's gone down so poorly this side of the water. It might have gone down better north of where we are in Essex, because they seem to have more benefits than we do. We just seem to be putting up with all of the inconvenience and out of this project, and we don't seem to be getting anything clearly from it. So I do appreciate this sort of new approach to getting this forward in a way that's going to benefit everybody.
I think that my quick response to thank you for those kind words. I mean, from a personal experience, I grew up, my parents lived next to the Newbury bypass, and so I have first-hand experience of living near a new road going in. And I think we often focus too much on engineering and not enough on community and society. And I think that's where the articulation needs to come. I do think, though, it would be wrong to set hairs running to think that we're able to change the scheme from its overall location and its overall scope. But there's quite a lot of mitigation along the perimeter of it, etc., that we can play with. But yeah, it'd be wrong to set expectations that we can start moving the route alignment, things like that. We aren't at that stage, but we're at the stage that says let's really understand both the benefits and the disbenefits better and articulate those in a local way, so that we can think about it in a local way.
Lucy, could you advise me who had the hand up first, please? I see
Can I
Councillor.
follow that up?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course, Luke. Come back.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's been quite shocking, really, and I understand your position about the route. It's obviously not the route that anyone on this task force would want, but it has shocked me how little effort there has been to sell any of the mitigations to not only this task force but the wider public. There's been absolutely zero effort to do that, and it's felt like any mitigations are going to be some sort of backroom deal later on. Well, you had an opportunity on day one to sell the benefits, and it's a shame, the mitigations at least, and it's a shame that didn't happen. So no, I do welcome the change of approach. Thank you.
It was Councillor Allen and then Laura Blake next. Chair.
Councillor Allen, please.
Good evening, Task Force, and welcome, Matt. Let's hope you're a bit easier to deal with, Matt, than your previous colleagues. From the moment that the LTC Task Force was born, I was on that task force. I did step down for a while to let another councillor have a go. And then I was reintroduced. Your colleagues from the start, I can remember, we threw many questions at those. And it was mainly over how we could influence the decisions of getting the design right and so on and so on. We mentioned that we'd like cut and cover in densely populated areas where the route would be close to. Just one question for you, Matt. Are now that you're in charge, are we able to influence you at all?
Yeah, but I suppose the key sort of the influence question is there's only so much that's flexible left, I guess. Rather like I was saying about the route, I know the route's not one you'd have chosen, but we aren't up for moving that. So it really depends on what aspects. But I've always seen, and I've always seen DCOs, and this sort of conversation is a point where actually, we've got to come together at some point. So if this thing is going to happen, then we've got to come together, and therefore there's a degree of flex on both sides needed.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt, and thank you, Chair. Basically, mitigation. It's about mitigation. Now, obviously, we know that this route cannot be changed, but I've often said that we need to get this right by design. A lot of it is overground. A lot of it is on raised elevations, which carries concerns of noise. We've spoken about different surfaces, road surfaces that carry, less sound. We've spoken about trees to be planted. It's just how far Highways England are prepared to. Oh, someone's not turned their phone off. Naughty person. It's just how far Highways England are prepared to hear our pleas, our requests. That's basically it, Matt. How much are you willing to open to that mitigation?
I mean, I thought, I think I've got my role is I've got a budget, I've got a time period and a scheme, and I've got to try and move those forward as best as possible. And at the same time, I've got to, and try and move, to a point where we at least can meet somewhere in the middle. So I've got a balance. It's a balance of things. So it's difficult to say. It depends on which area you look at. I suppose this is where I'm going to steal Gary's, who's going to present after me's thunder. But if you were to take what your officers have done in terms of the Hatch report, there's a good 50% of that we already are working on, and there's many more things that we can work on. So there's a number of things we can meet on. But if it was a fundamental, so that fundamentally change the economics of the scheme, whether that be significant cut and cover or something substantial like that, then that's starting to push the boundaries of the impossible. But it's that sort of conversation. That's the sort of exploration that we can go on. What's possible within the timeframes and within the budget we've got.
Chair, if I can just come in there, because predating Matt's arrival, you'll be aware that we brought a paper, or Highways England brought a paper to the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force in December 2019, where we discussed cut and cover at length. Further cut and cover is not an option available along the scheme in its current location or in its current design. And there's many reasons for that, including ground conditions, topography, environmental impacts, but also future plans for growth in the borough as well as part of the emerging local plan. So not to detract too much from what Matt said, but it wouldn't be fair for him to be asked to answer a question on elements that predate his arrival. So there are many ways to mitigate this scheme that isn't just about cut and cover, and we need to start focusing on that rather than the cut and cover issue that we have discussed at length already.
With the greatest of respect, Hannah, I didn't just highlight the cut and cover aspect. I mentioned trees, I mentioned road surfacing. There's lots of things that we've spoken about. So it wasn't entirely pushing the cut and cover thing that we would all like to see. But in terms of budget, I mean, there's going to be no flexibility on that. And I will remind the task force and especially Matt on the Highways England side of things, that I'll remind everyone that this is going to be a toll road. So the amount of money spent on this whole development will come back tenfold. It will be money returned, and it will start to be that cash cow that we've seen in terms of the Dartford crossing, because we've been promised so many times over the years that once it was paid for, it'd be free. And then we, on arrival of the first tunnel, then the second tunnel, when we got told the same. And we also got told it when the Queen Elizabeth II bridge was built, that, but we all know that it's a massive cash cow, and it earns, lots and lots of money. And so will this new Lower Thames crossing. So I'll just remind you all that, it will come back tenfold. So ideally, you should be spending, however much it takes to make that design right, from the beginning.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we are going to be coming on to more points later around that sort of detail. We've got quite a large presentation. So yeah, if we could keep those questions to later on in the presentation, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Go to Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, obviously, as everyone else does, I welcome any opportunity to have open discussions and for Highways England to listen to us, not only as a task force, but also as members of the public. Obviously, the Action Group represents thousands of residents and people along the route in all areas. with this new introduction of you saying that you want to listen and discuss things, can I ask, in light of the fact that there were adequacies of consultations from all the impacted local authorities about the adequacy of consultation, will you be holding further round of consultation moving forward now?
We are considering it. I suppose I haven't actually touched on the our DCO and the process. It probably is worth just me talking about it. So thank you for sort of asking that question. To some extent, we've been blessed with the gift of time. The planning inspectorate on our submission has asked us to provide some more information. And what that's allowed us, so we've got to pull that information, which we already have, but we're generating it in a format that works for them, etc. That's given us some time, and we're just trying to work out how best to use that time. And there's a number of key things we want to do. We want to engage more heavily with Anna and your officers. So we want to work heavily with Thurrock, Gravesham, and Havering as the key primary impacted local authorities. But also the question is do we, what would be a meaningful conversation to have with the public, and we're exploring that right now. I'd like to be in a firmer place to say we're definitely going to do that, but we are definitely, I can say we are exploring it, and we would like to come out and do another consultation of some sort of description. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's really good to hear, because when I've heard you on radio recently, Radio Kent and things, it sounds like you're just trying to push ahead as quickly as you can, and that it's all systems go. There's been no real mention of the fact that you've acknowledged that there may be need for further consultation with the public. So I definitely welcome that opportunity that you are at least considering it. I hope it's something that will move forward and give us a chance to be consulted on adequately. Not wishing to steal Gary's thunder, but just in the very short time we've had access to looking at the presentation that we're going to see shortly, there's a lot of information in there, which is the kind of detail that I know as a group and members of the public we've wanted to see. We've been asking for a long while, and there's been no indication of it. The fact that we're now at this late stage, it would be a shame if we're not given an opportunity to review this kind of level of detail on designs and things and not be able to have some kind of say on it. So I do hope that we have further consultation. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Laura. Lucy, has anyone else got their hand raised? Or
Councillor Rice and then Councillor Muldowney, Chair.
Okay, if we can just keep it relevant to the part of the presentation. We're going to pause after each part of the presentation for questions. So, Councillor Rice, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Matt, yes, it's good to hear this and fresh thinking. I think I've been fortunate enough to have been on Essex County Council and Thurrock since '89. When we were at Essex, we were responsible for building the A130. And we do understand the difficulties that come with new highways projects. My real beef, and I'll never let it go, is that once you get past Brentwood Road, really to make the communities of Chapel St Mary and Alsett Heath protected, that route needs to move south, only by a margin, to bring it away, because as it sits at the moment, we're talking about 500 metres away from people's properties, which in this day and age is unacceptable. We've gone on about cut and cover. Your predecessors have ruled it out. So the only way forward is to move this and to push it away from those communities. It's something that can be done, but of course there has to be a will. And I would be delighted to hear, what you think about such, an understanding really to actually protect those communities, because you go within, as I say, 500 metres of them, which if you think at the moment, they've got peace and quiet. Now you're going to put a 6-lane motorway within 500 metres of their homes. They won't even be able to hear themselves in their gardens. They won't be able to sleep at night because that road noise will be there 24 hours a day. So we're very mindful of, what you can do for us. So I would be delighted to hear what you can do.
I mean, I suppose my hands to some extent are tied by history. You know, it would have been. I'm not going to say it would have been different if I'd started before, because I don't know if it would have been. I mean, and on that particular case, you know, the way I look at it is, suppose when I look, and this might not be your perspective, but if I look at it from a sort of route selection, why we've ended up where we've ended up, I can see that the team have done a good job in trying to balance all the pressures, and however imperfect the solution is, it looks to be a well thought through logic. That there then ends up the problem, as you say, where we end up putting the road close to people's homes, and the change that brings. And you know, it is then how best can we then make that change happen in a way that's acceptable, however unacceptable that change is. And so I suppose, you know, go back to so that's so your direct question is what flexibility, what areas can we flex at the moment? Realistically, the route alignment and sort of heavy engineering is pretty stable for lots of reasons, in terms of, you know, it's been thought through in a way that balances cut and fill, etc., and all the rest of that good stuff. The bit that then we are exploring at the moment then is the edge treatment, you know, is the noise barriers, is the mitigation, is the trees, all the things that, you know, all that stuff. Have we done as much as we possibly can to mitigate? And it's that sort of mitigation that we can look at and flex. So that's where I'll have the biggest impact. But I suppose the other bit, and this is the sort of the organisational change in Highways England that helps. You know, I'm certainly more linked into the broader Highways England than other programme directors you may have talked to. And I suppose that then gives the ability to then think a bit more outside the box. So is there anything else that we can do more imaginatively that can make this thing better? And I don't, you know, off the top of my head, I'm struggling to think of one there. But it's about, can we flex the process a bit more differently? Can we bring other forms of investment that Highways England can facilitate into the space, etc.? And it's the type of thing that I'm challenging the team on. So it's about trying to stop the rigidity that we've had, which is for a good reason. Project teams have to get on and are tend to be held in a box. But can we be more flexible in broader ways? So that won't have given you the answer that you want. In that, you know, I don't think I can influence moving the route. But what I can do on that specific is I can get people I can understand whether we've been, you know, have we got the right solution? And I'm happy to take that away, but I can't guarantee, and I won't guarantee that we'll move the route.
Yeah, I mean, you know, ultimately, Matt, if you can't move the route, there are sections of the route, including Chadwell, St Mary, and Alsea Heath, which would lend itself to cut and cover, because once you put something into such a facility, you do away with the noise, you do away with the pollution, and you get people more happier. And it's something that's been achieved on the M25, on those tunnels that have gone near communities. And that's all we're really asking for, is a level playing field.
Let me, as I say, I'm happy to look into that at my, and but I won't promise anything right now, but let me look into it.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Councillor Muldowney for the final question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt, for saying that you're coming with a different approach. I appreciate that you're trying to do that. Unfortunately, as other councillors have said, I wonder if this has actually come too late to really make any difference. For me, the focus has always been about health. We've continually asked for the health impact assessment to be released. We've got that now, but obviously we're in a situation where our public health team are under such pressure due to the COVID pandemic that we can't easily analyse this information that we've got. I think probably from the assumption that I've certainly made from the lack of engagement in the meetings with officers and the lack of willingness to bring this information to the task force, and also the data that we've got just from our own public health team, which formed the basis of the health impact assessment, it's pretty obvious that without substantial mitigation like cut and cover or moving the route, this is going to have a major impact on our residents' health and well-being in areas where we've already got very distinct health inequalities, lots of people with COPD and heart conditions, etc. So what we're looking at here is actually our residents' lives being foreshortened by a 6-lane motorway. If, as you say, that you can't really do any of these things, which would mitigate that health impact, I'm wondering whether what you can offer us, what the value is of what you can offer us, although I am willing to listen with an open mind. One thing that I thought I might suggest, as you're talking about out of the box thinking, is there a possibility that Highways England could establish a fund so that those who are really worse impacted by the Lower Thames crossing, there could actually be a fund for them to be either temporarily or maybe permanently moved away from either the construction through the construction phase or long term, so that they don't have the impact on their health that this motorway is undoubtedly going to bring. Also, just to go back to cut and cover and what Councillor Allen said about this being a cash cow, being a toll road, I do wonder, sort of having heard about the A303, where it's going to be completely in a tunnel going past a historic monument, why it's considered not too expensive to protect a monument, but cut and cover being in a tunnel is too expensive to actually protect our residents' lives. So just something to, if you want to come back on those couple of points.
Yeah, I mean, that's a compelling conversation about sort of the A303, although it is quite a different scheme. But I suppose let's just talk about health. I suppose let's start with, is it worth talking to me or not? Yeah, I mean, it depends on your perspective, of course. I suppose what I can guarantee you is that I am definitely here to listen, and we will try and make positive actions. And I sort of set myself a target of the next 6 months. I'd like you to think that we can change how you feel about it. So that's my sort of personal goal. And in 6 months' time, you can tell me I'm completely wrong, and it might be slightly naive, I guess. But let's then talk more broadly about the A303. No, not the A303. What am I talking about? About health. So from a health perspective, I sort of simplify health to my simple brain down to air quality, and the air quality story for Lower Thames is actually a good one. And so why we haven't shared and been able to talk to you about it more generally, I suppose it's more been driven by the fact that the team have been busy preparing the documents to the DCO, etc. And it's been a failing of time as opposed to anything else. So I mean, yeah, overall, our air quality is good. There are some areas where we improve the existing network quite substantially. And there are some hotspots which we are focusing on in terms of trying to make sure that we have a limited impact. But overall, it's a positive story. And so I think we will probably need to take you on the journey on health. And then I suppose the last one then is blight. And if there is a negative impact on people's health, on people in their homes, then we obviously have blight as part of our scheme, which essentially does do that, which essentially moves people out, and it can't be for a temporary, so to some extent there is a way of dealing with most of that. But I think the point for me is us coming together and understanding, because your perspective is quite different from the overall sort of my team's perspective, and so it'd be good for us to be able to explain our position at maybe a later date on health.
Well, thank you for being open to like having these conversations. I mean, I do think that there's been 2 years of meetings, so I think it's a bit of a poor excuse that you were preparing for your DCO. There's been 2 years of meetings with the relevant group where you could have brought forward the health impact assessment data to be looked at by our public health team. Now we're in this situation where it's all hands to the deck to deal with COVID. We've got the health information now. But it's difficult for us to analyse that. I mean, maybe that's something that you can agree to come back to a further meeting and help us look at that. I think I'll wait for the actual data before I accept that this scheme is going to be good for air quality and our residents' health. If you don't mind, and I think blight. The remedies for blight, you have to actually live with it for a year. It won't help our residents during the construction stage. I mean, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, or up to a year after the scheme is built. Is that correct?
I think it is, but why don't we confirm that in writing afterwards? Because I am slightly rusty on blight rules. So why don't we confirm that?
I can help you with that. It's about noise impacts within a certain radius of the site. So there's a claim for noise impacts associated with the scheme from up to a year after the road's open to traffic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm going to allow you and Gary to make some progress, because I'm well aware we're 40 minutes into the meeting and we still haven't actually seen the bulk of the presentation yet. And I'm sure we'll have some questions at relevant points throughout. So back over to you, Matt.
So this is for me quite simply over to the team then, really. So Gary's going to run through the Hatch report and then over to Claire on the other 2 items. So do you want to click on to the next one? And Gary, do you want to step in?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Gary Hodge. I'm the technical lead for Lower Thames Crossing project. Before we start, what I just wanted to say was that this is just a brief update of where we are on the Hatch report. The next part of the presentation, which is the majority presentation, is the approach to the design and quality of the report, which Claire's going to go through. So in this one, I'm just really touching on the key points where we are with the Hatch report. And what I can say is it's a really useful document, and it's we've had it for a couple of months now. And what we've done is we've been through it. There are 57 measures in total, and of 27 of those measures are already part of our emerging resubmission. And you can see in the table below that they're broken down into 3 packages. So you've got the direct measures, which there are 23 of. There's the council-led support, which there are 12 of, and then the legacy measures, which there are 22. And what we've tried to do here is just to show where we are with them at this stage. So you can see we've got one that's already going to go into what we believe into the main works contract. And I'll just say that we are working with the Thurrock council officers on actually developing this. So it's not complete by any means. It's a work in progress. We've identified that there are 14 of them already identified within our legacy team. Legacy and benefits have been pulling information together, and then there are about 12 that we've got already putting forward into the as I say, the emerging resubmission of the DCO. And I'd just like then to touch on some of the ones that are in the actual other section. I mean, there's 30 of them there. We're still developing this. We've got the first one, the sustainable public transport. That is, if you look at the detail behind what the ask is, the numbers at the end, by the way, the M is for direct mitigation, so that's number 7, and then you've got the council-led support one, which is number 8, and then the last 3 are all legacy ones. So the top one, the sustainable public transport, that's really an ask for shuttle buses, electric shuttle buses to, and in particular, this one is from Standard Hope to the main compounds. So we're trying to work how we get that into into the contract, but I mean, we might find that it might be from some other station, so we need to develop that one. The next one, the council-led community and public health. I mean, this touches on the health impact assessment. It's really providing a link between the Highways England team and the council to develop that and make sure it's implemented as we go forward with the design. Then we've got the bridge over the Tilbury Loop. I mean, this is quite an interesting one. This is actually, we're looking at putting a temporary structure over the Tilbury Loop line for our construction, but making it a permanent bridge in the future. And obviously that means working closely with the council to ensure that the planning permission for it and everything is as required. And then the improvement to the internet and 5G. We're obviously wanting to put internet and 5G within our compounds, and so what we're looking there is how we can integrate what we develop for the sites. So, you know, things like within the overbridges that we put all the ducting in, and that then ties into a legacy internet for the community. And then the last one is the public rights of way network. I mean, on that one, what we're trying to do is to look at completing some of the gaps and enhancing the wider network. And one of the projects in there is the Two Forts Way project. So again, we're looking at how we develop that. And all these we're sort of working, as I say, with the officers to try to actually identify how they're going to be delivered and in what way. And that really leads me on to the last point there, that there's 57 items here. A lot of them are within the current statements of common ground, but we're focusing on these measures at the moment, but we're not ignoring obviously what's also in the statements of common ground, which we will be looking at how we deliver that in our next submission of the DCO. So that's really all I wanted to touch on the Hatch report. And then we're going to go on to the main part of the presentation, which I say is Claire going through the approach to design and quality of LTC.
Thanks, Gary. Are we going to do questions for Gary now, or should we leave it to the end?
I think we should leave it to the end and let's get through the presentation, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it.
Okay, thanks everybody.
That's great. I think we only had an hour slot, so I'm going to probably have to race through this a little bit. To introduce myself, my name's Claire Donnelly. I'm a lead architect on the Lower Thames Crossing project, and as you'd expect, I'm an architect by background, but I have a specialism of working very closely with landscape architects on large-scale infrastructure projects. And this project, more than most, has really been an exercise in collaboration, both within a very large and diverse design team internally, but also with a large range of stakeholders externally. So my presentation is split into two parts. First of all, it's a little bit dry, it's more procedural about process and documents, and the second part, I'm going to talk you through some of the key design components that we had in the last DCO submission. They were a snapshot in time because obviously we have since that time we've started to work with Thurrock officers to develop those designs and those ideas further. So just talking a little bit about where we've got to in the design process, but also I'm going to just signpost you to some important documents in the application documents. So back in 2017, Highways England asked us to produce a design narrative, and that's essentially why me and my team were appointed. And the design narrative was supposed to look at how the road and the highway structures could be integrated as well as possible in their environment. So we produced a document where we analysed the context all the way along the route. We've got a very varied context all the way along the route, you know, from the marshland at Tilbury to the forest at Thames Chase and all the other landscapes in between, and looked at the communities that we were impacting on as well. And through that, we identified a number of ways that we could approach the design of the landscape and integration of the scheme. Not all of them were adopted, but several were. So a good example is we highlighted the fact that actually many of the junctions were located on wooded ridgelines across the project. So generally our approach to mitigation in the landscape and planting around those junctions, which are usually the biggest structures on the project, is to plant them quite heavily as woodland. So around the A13 junction, around the M25 junction, you'll notice that there is an awful lot of woodland planting in those areas. We then discussed those ideas from the design narrative. We had a really iterative process with the highways engineers, the drainage engineers, the ground engineering, but also externally with stakeholders like Thurrock, but also taking on board consultation comments. And that resulted in 2 documents which were issued with the DCO and will be reissued with the next version of the DCO. So they are the project design report, and that describes the process we went through in design development and the factors that influenced and shaped it. And then there's the design principles, and this is a really important document. It's primarily written, but it is a forward-looking document. It's something that we're committing to in the DCO, and that the detailed designs that are brought forward in the future have to comply with the principles in that document. Just to give you a little bit of background then about how that works in practice, we are a preliminary design. So we've done quite a lot of work on the landscape, but some other elements like structures will be developed in more detail in the future post approval. And there are sort of layers of refinement that we've put in the DCO that reflects the process that we went to. So at the bottom of that, we have what we call the baseline design. This is a sort of straightforward engineering proposal that has determined structural depths, the location of the bridge, its width, but not really anything about how the structure itself is going to look. So on top of that, basic design, we layer additional design principles, which is the document I was just talking to. They're written design principles, and they'll talk about maybe if there's a particular material palette we need to apply on top of that baseline design, or if there's, for example, text or any other kind of interpretation. So it's quite a big document, and it's worth a good read. And how that might influence the design is then illustrated in the project design report. And then also, because it's a continuum, after DCO and the approval stages is over, there are commitments that we're making within the construction contracts where we're asking the contractor to deliver us a high quality design. So we have provided more details to give them guidance on how we would like those structures to look, so that they comply with the design principles, which they can then go away, do all the technical work, you know, calculating forces and the construction details, and apply that in the finished design. So that's the sort of dry bit. I should say as well, we have quite a big list of things that we're currently talking to officers about, as well as other stakeholders, and this is just a selection of them. So we are developing and having active dialogue on quite a few of the things that I will even be presenting to you today. So I'm now going to present proposals from the previous DCO application that we made. So a large part of our work has been in the landscape and also in the non-motorised user strategy work we did, which is on public rights of way. But today I'm going to mainly talk about some of the big structures that we will be building in Thurrock as part of the highways work. So my team were really interested in particularly the overbridges as they span over LTC, because they provide these vital links that will maintain connectivity in and around the road alignment. So we did a lot of analysis quite early on, and we fed in, to example, how the green bridges should work, because they're not all the same. Hofford Road, which has got this rural lane character that you can only get down by a 4x4, is going to be treated quite differently Then the green bridges we're also providing at Muckingford Road and North Road, where it's actually really important to have those connections for pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians. So we looked and we analysed all of those bridges, taking care to as well make sure that we don't just think at the edge of the structures, that we look where people are coming from and going to and how those structures will be used. And we started to drop them into categories, and through that analysis as well, we sort of worked out how they would fit in that environment, how the edges work, how the integration works. And we noted that some structures would require some improvement on that baseline design. And before we decided which ones, we went and spoke to Highways England Design Review Panel, which is an independent design review panel, and we selected some to become enhanced. And I think it will become quite clear when I talk you through one of those proposals at the Mardik why we needed to enhance those structures. And so we've enhanced in the north with the sort of the pink ones here. So the North Portal Surface Building, the Orsett Fen Viaduct, the Mardik Viaduct, and the Thames Chase Bridge, which connects both sides of Thames Chase Community Forest. But in addition, it's important to remember that we've had quite a lot of close landscape integration work on the green bridges as well, at Muckingford Road, Hofford Road, Green Lane, and North Road. And also that even if something is grey on this list, we are expecting a high quality and good design for those structures. These are just two extracts from that design principles document I was talking to you about, where we're talking about how they should be integrated, buildings and landscapes seamlessly into their buildings and structures seamlessly into their landscapes. I'm not expecting you to read this and absorb this now, but it's the idea there is a level of detail above what you'll see in some of the drawings. So first of all, I'm going to talk you through the proposals for the North Portal, which is one of those enhanced structures. The North Portal is a particularly large structure. So this one is the North Portal and this one is the South Portal. And it's here purely really to show you that they are a pair. And it is quite important that they are similar to each other to an extent, but then we have to remember that actually they're in completely different landscapes and completely and need a completely different approach to both the engineering and its integration into that landscape. So whereas the South Portal is in this hill, this rolling hill, and it's in a 30-metre deep cutting, at the north we're in a landscape which was originally marshland, and has been highly manipulated by man throughout its history. It's incredibly valuable because of its a close relationship with the river, and so you see a number of structures along this stretch of the river be related to defence, agriculture, landfill or industry. And the view from the other side, it was a particularly challenging, so this is our site here. It's a particularly challenging site to design for because it's in the middle of a PFA extraction and landfill operation. So the land is literally shifting and changing as we're trying to design for it. And it's also important to note that it's in a flood zone. So as we've got a critical piece of national infrastructure, we need to protect that. Both from the road itself from flooding, but also making sure that in the event of a flood that we can maintain emergency access to it. So the structure itself is surrounded by bunding. It's surrounded by earthworks, and there are two access roads that come along, and they sit on top of a bund and then wrap round the structure. This is the portal, what we call the tunnel aperture there, and it sits in a hollow. Basically, we've tried to sort of bury all of the structures that sit above ground in here within the landscape, with the raised access roads coming round the sides. I do apologise. That's my phone. Oh shush. There is also then a building. This is the tunnel services building. It has a green roof, also to try and integrate it within that landscape, and it slopes down as well as it sort of slopes up from the tunnel. It slopes up here, as you can see, just gently lifts up towards the end. Both the North Portal and the South Portal, we've tried to keep quite a restrained palette of materials, but both are characterised by this strip of weathering steel, which wraps around the main portal aperture. The location of the building is constrained by the means of access to the tunnel below. So this is a plan taken through the tunnel openings, and there are a series of accesses required for emergency access and maintenance access into a gallery that sits below the main running tunnel. So we had to put these structures in here in the box section of it, and that has then constrained the design and the location of the building. So this is the tunnel services building. It is a substantial building, being about 82 metres long by 41 metres wide, but the majority of it is for kit. It's for either M&E kit or firefighting kit, including some quite seriously large storage tanks which are required in the event of a fire. Any buildings, any sort of rooms for people are concentrated in this corner, and it will be the main corralling point in the event of an emergency for emergency services to get together and manage the event at that tunnel. You can see here just a little bit more detail about how that sits in the landscape, recessed behind earthworks, lower in the landscape, just to try and keep the impact of that building just as low as it possibly can be, and with obviously the green roof on top. And then we have just a couple of notional elevations. We were looking at the fort elevations in here, so it is quite a blank elevation. There's not a need for a lot of windows. In actual fact, what we need to do is make sure this building doesn't overheat because of the amount of M&E kit in there. So very simple, consistent material palette with the weathering steel roof. We wanted to use local stone gabions wherever we could in the facade, and that really helps with the thermal mass of the building as well and keeping it cool. And then also finishes like permeable paving are really important to us as well, making sure that we can be as sustainable as possible in the design of that building. Now the building is one thing, but actually it's very it's sort of pales into comparison with the scale of the earth moving and the earthworks around that building. And we knew that we needed to find a landscape restoration for the land around the northern portal in what is termed now, we call it Tilbury Fields. So it's this area through here, number 4 on this plan. And we would need to come up with a landscape scheme for that to help house some of the sort of peaty organic material that we are going to take out of the cutting when we're excavating down to start tunnelling. Just before I do though, important to note other landscape integration features on this plan. We have, as I say, we have here a wooded ridge that runs broadly so from the southeast up to the northwest, and we wanted to reinforce that. So as the road emerges from the cutting, goes onto embankment, and before it rises onto the viaduct, we have some woodland planting in and around that, diversion of footpath 200 around our works as well, and integrating back in. So there's just a few other things that we're doing just to the north there. Returning to this area, so we wanted, we looked at the history of the area, and it is an amazing landscape, but because of that history and that the sort of man-made interventions into it, and particularly we were inspired by the defensive history of the area, and realised that because of the bend in the river here, it's had this important role in the defence of London and the UK, with Tilbury Fort and Coalhouse Fort being particularly important there. But also there are a number of other fortifications and batteries along this stretch. And we felt actually that it was sort of under-celebrated. So if we could actually come up with a landscape design which created some high points in there, because at the moment it's quite difficult to see beyond some of the land raising that's been done East Tilbury Marshes, it would be great. You could have viewpoints and lookouts that you could see this fantastic estuary landscape across the river, but also east and west along there. So we have developed this set of contours here. They are constrained by the fact that the land is designed to be returned to pasture afterwards for agriculture, albeit with a series of paths which will be dotted around, which will give people access to those high points in the landscape. And we also felt that we wanted to have some kind of, we're calling it a placemaking feature, which is captured by design principle, to create a focal point or landmark at that place. And then that would also have a degree of interpretation and give people information about the landscape in which they see they are situated. As Gary mentioned, we're looking at the Two Forts Way. So at the moment, we're just doing a bit of additional work to work out how this could work better with a stronger and reinforced route across here, and also looking at some kind of at the landscape mitigations and planting that we're putting on this site. Moving north, I'm going to look at the Tilbury Viaduct. Okay, so just to the north, we have the Tilbury Viaduct. So we're just looking at the portal down here. The road rises up onto embankment and then ultimately onto a viaduct structure, which allows us to get over the Tilbury Loop railway line. It's quite a clean structure, long, thin, and because of the fact that it's going over the Tilbury Loop railway line, it's required to have a minimum of 6 meters clearance between the railway line and the underside of the structure. And that's captured here on the sort of the DCO structures plans that we're showing. These are based on quite conservative assumptions, but that head height, though it does make the structure maybe slightly more prominent in the landscape, actually really helps us in terms of the proportion of the structure itself. These are visualizations. They were included with the DCO, but we've zoomed right in on a high resolution version so you can get quite a good look at it. And that has been one of the problems I've found with trying to visualize this structure, is that actually finding a good viewpoint for it has been quite tricky. So I'm going to show you 2 viewpoints. The first one is here at the level crossing, just as you cross the Tilbury Loop railway line, and the other one is a new one, which is just the computer generated one from a farm track over here. You can see from this viewpoint of the Tilbury Viaduct that there's an awful lot of woodland planting existing in the foreground, as well as some of the existing infrastructure. And so when we actually did the visualization, it wasn't particularly helpful because in a way it's already screened by existing vegetation, and it's hard to get a good look at it. And it's actually quite hard generally. I've done lots of different viewpoints of this one, trying to get a nice close look at it. In order to get a good visualization of it, you do have to go off the public routes. And so we did a CGI, so it's not a photo montage, from about here, so that you can get a look through and under. And so this is the design of the Tilbury Viaduct. You can see it has a V-shaped pier form, which is good. It recesses that structure and the bulk of that structure below. It has quite a good height, which allows you to get those glimpses of sky on the other side, and it sort of sits in this sort of natural bowl. So things that we will be working on in the future is the integration of acoustic barriers and parapets along the top, and also just making sure that the abutments at either end are as well integrated into the earthworks as they possibly can be. Finally, I'm going to talk about the Mardik Viaduct. So the Mardik and Orsett Fen viaducts are what we call enhanced structures. And I think it will come clear as I'm talking why we felt that it was really important that we do expend a little bit of additional effort on the design of these structures. So the Mardik and the landscape around the Mardik in this floodplain is really quite beautiful, and as the officers told us, one of the best examples of fenland outside of London. So we have this very flat open plain. The Mardik itself is running through here, and that means that you have really long views across that landscape, and then up to the higher ground of Basildon and Brentwood in the distance. So it has this sort of really tranquil sense of remoteness. There's not a huge amount of development within the body of the fenland itself. And that made it also a focus for green infrastructure. So early in the design process, we worked with our environment colleagues on mapping all of the green infrastructure projects in the area. We noted that this stretch, which is the Mardik Trail, was particularly pivotal in a number of different routes, including what we call the Forest Loop, which links up to Thames Chase. So key moves of our structure around key routes of our strategy around non-motorised users or pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians has been to link up these routes and to really try and make this route as pleasurable as we possibly can. This is just a map of the Mardik and Tilbury, sorry, the Mardik and Orsett Fen viaducts. So if I can get my mouse, yes. So we have actually two viaducts. We have the top one is the Mardik Viaduct, and the bottom one is the Orsett Fen Viaduct, and it spans, you can see, a number of different watercourses in the area. So we had to get over these. The alignment meant that we would need to be above ground in the floodplain once again, so that the road doesn't flood when we have those flood events. So it is raised up along there, but we also had to be mindful that we couldn't put a huge amount of earthworks in there, because all that does is reduce the amount of flood storage available within that floodplain. So it's a balanced approach between the two long viaducts and then a stretch of embankment in between. And our approach to landscape in this area was basically, because we knew we couldn't use screening earthworks, which we do in lots of other places. So we have an awful lot of false cutting along the project, where you effectively build a small hill, linear hill either side of the road, but that takes up more of that flood volume. So we knew we couldn't use that screening approach, which we would normally do when we're trying to obscure or hide the road. So that meant we had to do two things. One, we looked at an approach to re-wetting the landscape. So that fenland landscape has been drained and been used for agriculture for several years now. So within these pockets, what we've done is to remove that drainage, and hopefully it will return to wetland in the longer future, which is good for both improving views across the landscape and creating a more interesting view in that foreground, but also for biodiversity. I also understand it's possible that it will have some it will improve some of the flood characteristics of the area. We've also got some woodland planting to screen and break up the stretches, particularly as we transition from embankment to viaduct along these areas. And we're also trying to link up the public rights of way. So these are completely new parts, new public rights of way that will link footpaths in the north with Green Lane in the south, and hopefully try and make that network of public rights of way a little bit more coherent. So once again, we did our analysis and we looked at the baseline design that had been produced here. And you can see here, it's got two longer spans of structure just to get the clearance over the watercourses, but also over the access zones required either side of the watercourses. And that led to some quirks in the design. I should point out as well that Mardik Way, that really important public right-of-way route, comes up all the way through here, underneath this watercourse here. And what it meant was that to achieve those longer spans here, to get over the watercourses, you're actually having to deepen the structure. There's your longer span, deeper structure. But what we wanted to do was try and maintain some of those views for the users of that public right of way, and try and keep a more open sense as for those people who are crossing the fenland landscape. So working with our engineering colleagues, we looked at a number of different approaches that we could adopt and worked out if we could have longer spans generally, we could have equal spans, and we could follow a different structural approach, which meant we wouldn't have to lower, we wouldn't have that restrained headroom right at the point that people walk. We explored a number of different structural approaches, looking at the form of the piers as well, because we can't plant in front of it, because it's a flat open landscape. The appearance of the piers is particularly important for the Mardik. And we agreed that this was probably the best approach because, one, it means that we've got that raised headroom right in the middle of these arches, which is where the watercourses flow and where people want to walk. It has that sort of good rhythm as it crosses the landscape. We've recessed the pier slightly and they have a triangular form, so that there's not such a strong line as you can see on the horizon, and you can still catch those glimpses of sky and those views through and across that fenland landscape. So that is a whistle-stop tour of those three areas of design. We are also, as I say, this is the list you saw earlier of different aspects of the design that we're still talking to officers about, and this list will get longer, I'm sure, as it's developing. And then I was going to go for questions.
Thank you very much. Just some camera back on. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to break this up slightly and see if there's any questions for Gary regarding the hatch document and mitigation, and Claire regarding the design aspects that we've just had the report on. And then we'll go to wider questions after. Councillor Spillman, I think, had his hand up first.
I was going to ask questions for Claire, so do you want me to wait? And sorry.
No, Claire or Gary will take them in one round. That's fine.
Okay. I'd like to see a lot more of an ambitious approach to the beautification around the areas, basically. I mean, one area was, you know, where the fenland was, and there was the woodland next to it. Why can't you bring that right out? Yeah, is that not something that's possible? I don't know.
So
if
it's actually, yeah, no, I can go back. The reason we haven't done that is because the landscape character that exists is fenland, it's open, it's flat, and you get these really long views. If I foreshorten it with woodland planting, it's out of character with the current landscape. But what you do have in the current landscape is these blocks of woodland, which usually at the corners of fields, sorry, let me get back to the landscape plan, that are usually at the corners of fields and sort of like, mark the edge and boundaries of things. So what we've tried to do there is just replicate, no, I'm going the right way, replicate that approach to landscape in the design of what we've done. Don't stop now, you've done so well. There we go. So you can see these kind of blocks.
Yeah, so if you look at 3, for instance,
yeah,
you've put in a strip of woodland there.
Yeah.
Why don't we have a more ambitious programme and turn that whole 3 area into woodland?
Because we want to turn it into wetland. We want to return it to this fenland character. So the car woodland or the wetland woodland that we're providing will break up the edges of the structures that we're putting in, but we don't want it to be the dominant feature in that landscape. Mm. That's generally the approach. We have put huge amounts of planting, woodland planting, in around the junctions. I mean, massive swathes of woodland planting, which when it's mature will really hopefully screen a lot of those structures. But that's because it's appropriate to the landscape that exists at the moment in those locations. Whereas here it's that more open and flat landscape, that sense of remoteness kind of thing.
What I would like out of this project in terms of these sort of mitigations is for you to add real social value to the natural areas. Now, fenland doesn't have much social value. In its very nature, you can't go on it. It's too wet. And these strips of woodland, although they obscure, that's all they do. You know, they don't have any social value. They don't become areas where people would want to go. And that's the sort of thing that I would like to see in this scheme.
Okay. I mean, so the wetland was a key request of groups like Land of the Fans, who've been looking to restore the wetland in this area for many years. So we were trying to respond to comments that we were getting from the community and from community groups in the development of that landscape. You're right, it's harder to walk around. We have provided routes through and around that landscape, but yeah, you're not really able to sort of trudge all over it in the way that you can in some of our other landscapes.
Yeah, I mean, I would like you to put a plan to us that includes one area which has, you know, great value as a place that people can visit. As a result of.
Councillor Spillman, if I can just jump in here. This presentation is about the design of the structures. It's not a presentation about the wider other areas of planting and mitigation. The design is emerging in line with the feedback that the team has received, not just from the council, because it's not just about what Thurrock Council thinks, it's about what a whole host of other community organisations and group think as well. It's been brought forward in conjunction with our own expert Steve Plum, who's been having conversations with the team. I think what you're looking for is a completed piece of design. We're nowhere near there. This is at the start of a lengthy process where the detail will be developed in layers. So what you're asking for is something that is going to come much further down the line than where we are now. So all I'm saying to you guys is you need to be patient. You know, you've got to think of DC as an iterative process. It's an iterative process. It's bits that come forward.
With respect, Anna, I'm expressing a view in a forum where we've got 3 senior figures from Highways England about ideas that I would like to see. I'm not asking for cast iron assurances, but I'm expressing the wishes of people, of many people that would like to see these extra resources in the borough. So with respect, I'll choose what questions I ask and not you.
So, I mean, just to reinforce, so we've got open space, new open space provision that we're putting in at Blackshots as well. I mean, even on this plan, not all of this is wetlands. We have grassland mitigation as well through some of it. So it's good feedback. We also have, for example, we had an idea that we might put community woodland in the woodland pockets and in around the A13 junction, where we've got some quite large areas of woodland as well. So we'll take that away and we'll have a look at it.
Thank you, Lucy. Have you got see who's got their hands raised?
Yep, it's Councillor Muldowney, Peter Ward, Laura Blake, and then Robert Quick.
Councillor Muldowney, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire, for the presentation, and also, sorry, my screen's gone dead. Who was it who did the first presentation?
Gary.
I apologise for forgetting your name, Gary. I've got one question for Gary and one for Claire, if I wish. So if I start with the one for Gary, it's quite easy. So you said from the Hatch mitigation, economic mitigation list, you've got 27 of the items that were put forward are going to form the part of the resubmission. Can we get a list of what they are? I mean, I'm not saying immediately now for you to be able to reel them off, but can we get a list of what they are, you know, after the meeting? Can that be provided, please, so we can know what those are? That would be good.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll give those to the officers and they can pass them on to you.
Okay, thank you. And for Claire, I mean, I can see from a design aspect how you've changed, particularly sort of the Mardik and the Orset Fen Viaduct, and you did a very good job of evoking that idea of the tranquil view and the tranquil sense of remoteness that you can see across the fen land at the moment. And although I can see the design differences that you've made, I would say are an improvement on what was planned before, you can also see that you do just lose that view, don't you? I mean, you can see little glimpses of sky underneath the computer graphic, but I mean, it cuts across the viaduct is going to cut across the landscape. That's quite clear, and no amount of design changes are actually going to stop that breaking up the view
Yeah.
that we've got already there. So although I appreciate that you've gone to a lot of effort with this, the design, you know, it's an overall loss for us in that part of the route, which is a shame. The Tilbury Viaduct. Did you say that you're going to keep the planting there, the trees that are already there?
So there is, I mean, there is a number of trees. There are a number of trees that have to come out during the construction phase. Generally, if we take them out during the construction phase, we put something back. But then we're also putting additional tree planting on that wooded ridge, with a similar aim as well to what I talked about here in terms of particularly it helps soften the impact. Particularly as you go from an embanked solution into the structure, the hard structure, it softens the impacts of how you view those structures. So we are planting additional trees, yes, down at the Tilbury Viaduct.
Okay. So overall, will that be a net gain of trees, or it's going to remain about the same?
I believe, yes, it is a net gain. Yeah.
Can you give me any kind of idea about how much? Because obviously
no.
But, right, okay.
So actually, I haven't got a Thurrock specific for you, because obviously a lot of the tree loss is in the south. I think in the north you'll find we're planting a lot more trees than we're taking out, but that's something I could try and find out. I could try and get you those figures for Thurrock. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Peter Ward was next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a comment really, and one question. Just on this one's for Gary really, and obviously we are engaging with the Lower Thames Crossing team as the Port of Tilbury, but I would reiterate that being built on the doorstep of this project is the biggest construction material aggregate terminal in the UK, with all of the production facilities that go with it to build a road. It would be pretty remiss if it wasn't used on this project. I mean, it has the capability with your traffic numbers on construction to take around 50% of the construction traffic off of Thurrock's roads. So that needs to be really high up the agenda, I would suggest, when we're talking about mitigation, particularly around construction. As I say, I'm engaged with the LTC team on it anyway, so it's not something that you won't be aware of, but I think it's quite important in terms of when Thurrock's council's looking at mitigation, that should be very high up on the agenda. The biggest part of this scheme, apart from its impacts, is what will happen during construction, which will be over several years, as we know. So the less we can disrupt the local roads, the better. And if we can get a 50% reduction, then I think that's something we should all be embracing. The other point I wanted to make is looking at that design, there's a couple of new things in there which I obviously haven't seen before because you've changed them. One is you've got a waterhole area where the tunnel emerges on the Essex side. And the other bit obviously is the bridge over the railway line. Now, I know that there's not a link road, regrettably, in this into Tilbury, which we think there should be. And I'm talking about this from a business perspective. I'm the business rep. And that's something that we've obviously had lots of dialogue on with the Lower Thames Crossing team. One of my questions is, there is a potential link road in Highways England's plans for the future. It's not in this scheme. I'm assuming that any of these changes don't impact on the future capability to deliver that link road in the future, particularly given the fact that we have an imminent Freeports bid into government, which we believe between us and London Gateway will generate about 20,000 new jobs. So it's quite important that business has those links in the future. I'm not going to go over the fact it's not in the scheme because everybody from Highways England well knows my feelings on it. But I'm assuming that there's still, that doesn't inhibit that link road going in, those changes that you've made to the design.
It's a highways question, so I'm going to throw that one to Gary.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I mean, obviously on your first point, yes, I know we're in discussions with you on the construction traffic and things like that. So I won't touch on that. But on this one, what we've done is we've tried to keep the area clear of the main utilities in that area, so that we haven't precluded the introduction of a junction at that point in the future. I mean, you can see there's the attenuation pond there at the moment, which might have to be rearranged, but that's the only really thing that's actually that. I mean, with any design, when you get to the detail of it, I mean, we've got at the moment emergency access roads going through there. And they might well change if at some point there is a junction in that location. I hope.
Okay. Yeah, no, that answers the question. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Peter. Quick question from me. I'm not sure if you both want to tackle it. It's probably quite a simple one. The Tilbury Viaduct, where it crosses the Tilbury Loop railway, there was a mention of 6 metres of clearance, and just so that's in perspective, I suppose, that's 6 metres of clearance above the top of the electrified railway electrics, basically their cables. So that'd be 6 metres above that, I guess, because then on Gary's part there was a mention of the bridge over the Tilbury Loop railway of Legacy 7. So I'm just trying to see how that would look. Would the bridge go underneath the LTC but above the railway lines?
So it's 6 metres from the ground rather than 6 metres above, and that gives you the clearance for the overhead lines and the trains. So it's not 6 metres on top of that. And then Gary.
Yeah, I mean, if there was any going over the top of the LTC would be, I mean, if you wanted to take it over, you'd want to take it towards the tunnel portal where we're coming out of the ground. So it you would only be at a sort of about 7 metres above the ground level at that location. So that it would be a similar height to what the viaduct is.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that explanation. Lucy, who's next, please?
It's Laura Blake next.
Laura Blake.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for your presentations. I'm sure when we've had a chance to look through, I know we're very limited on time for you to present it tonight, but I'll have lots more questions, which I'll email through. But just a couple of points to raise. Firstly, very topical at the moment in Thurrock, the flood aspects of things. Are you currently reviewing the impacts of flooding in the areas that LTC will run through currently? Because obviously we have had a lot of flooding in the past few days, week. So when you're taking into account all these floodplains and the work that you've been doing, I mean, was that done on a dry day in the summer, or are you now looking at worst case scenario to see so that you are making a full assessment of the potential risks?
Gary?
Yeah, I'll just come there. Yeah, no, we have actually worked with the Environment Agency on an updated flood risk assessment, which will obviously take into the particular scenarios, which will take on in consideration whatever the worst, not the worst, they're either done on, I think, is a 50-year or a 100-year. I think I'm not sure which one this has been done on, but I can find out and let you know.
Yeah.
Thank you. And also, I appreciate the amount of effort that's obviously gone into the presentation, Claire, on your part with the design aspects of it. I was quite surprised, though, that there's nothing in there about the A13 junction, considering the scale of that junction. Is that something that you have work on that you could forward to us separately, or is there any reason it wasn't in the presentation?
No, it was purely a matter of just trying to focus on 3 things we could get through, I think, in time. We don't have a lot more visualization or visual material on the A13 junction than we've shown you previously but it would be buried in the consultation material. As I say, our approach has really been with the A13 junction to really wood it, to really get some good woodland planting around it, and build on that sort of edge that you have to Black Shots at the moment, and provide some screening as well for the people of Baker Street. So I could probably get you some landscape plans, but that would be the level, I think, at the moment, because it's so big. It's actually very hard to visualize, to get down to the granularity of it. But it was just time today is the reason we didn't present it.
Okay, yeah, it will be beneficial for any visuals we can have of that junction, because that is one, I mean, they are all of concern, obviously, to everybody, but that one being a very big one, it is, as you say, very hard to visualise. So to have some kind of visuals on that, and when you mention the trees, obviously, we know that when you're showing images with the trees, that's some years in the future. So we are going to have to live with this if it goes through. So it would be good to know. And then just to finish up, really, directed more at Matt, I would guess, is the fact that, as I said earlier, this presentation is definitely giving us more of an insight into the actual visual aspects and the design aspects of the route, something we have been asking for years and something that we have never been given any kind of insight as we have in this today. Please, if you are seriously considering doing consultation, these are the kind of design images that we need. We need to be able to see what we will be living with if this goes forward, and that is something that we have never had before. You're now starting to show signs of showing us glimpses of that. Please carry on, and please give us further consultation so that people know what we're really up against, because we're trying to get word across, but the information that we've had visually has been greatly lacking. We've asked time and time again for fly-throughs and things like that. Nothing has been realistic. We need more realistic views of what we're going to get, please.
Yep, message heard. Thank you for that feedback. And I suppose my build on that is we need to be able, for instance, on the number of trees, to be able to say how many trees in Thurrock rather than on the whole scheme. We tend to get stuck on the sort of total engineering, and we need to be much more community focused.
Yeah, and as I say, trees, it's always what it's going to look like in so many years to come. That doesn't help us now. And who's going to look after these trees and make sure that they are there in all those years and they do grow? Who's going to water them? Who's going to manage them? Because we know from other major schemes around the country, there's been neglect and that hasn't happened. So we need reassurances. We need the detail and we want the information. And I think that we deserve that, considering the impact that you're going to be putting on our area if this goes ahead.
Just on that, one of the documents that we'll be developing and resubmitting with the application is the landscape management plan. So we're working through a lot of that detail now as well about the maintenance and management of these areas of landscape we're putting in. And which you will be consulted on. This group will bring that here.
Yeah, all I was going to say is a lot of these documents that we've had, Claire, with respect, that we've been told about previously, it's all going to become apparent at DCO stage. By the time it's at DCO stage, you're going to inundate us with huge amounts of documentation. It's not fair that it's all the pressure is put on us, and things like the fact that when you tried to submit before, you were holding back those documents and as long as you possibly could, rather than when the application went in. It doesn't work favourably with the community. When we're desperately trying to get this information, you're keeping it from us as long as possible. Obviously, this isn't aimed at you personally, Claire. It's aimed as a whole to Lower Thames Crossing. Matt, with you leading up there. We need this information. We want this information, and we feel we deserve this information if this is going to be pushed forward as it is.
And I can say categorically, we are moving to a much more open sharing piece. I think some of the things you rightly asked for, things like visualizations, we will need to generate, but there's many things, and it's rather like Gary's summation of the Hatch report. There's many things where it's clear that we haven't communicated a lot of the good intent that's inside the scheme. So we want to open up much more, and we are doing that. So we will take your feedback and take it on board and try and make it, make that sort of openness even better going forward.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Matt, for answering that. Do we have any more hands raised, Lucy?
Yeah, I've got quite a few. So it's Robert Quick next, and then Councillor Muldowney.
Mr. Robert Quick.
Hi, thanks, Claire and Gary, for your presentation. A couple of questions from me. First of all, around the construction phase, when will we see more detail of whatever mitigation you're going to encompass during the compass phase? Because at the moment, the local residents find the plans that we're getting to be quite frightening with the noise and the pollution. And secondly, the level of detail you've just given on those three sections, when will we see that same sort of detail on the areas where there's built up, like the East Tilbury, Linford and Chapel St Mary? Because all of the drawings, plans we've seen so far are not helpful at all. So we need to get that same sort of detail you've just given for those areas near to the housing.
Okay.
Let me, shall I jump in and answer, Gary, and you can sort of add where I get it wrong. I suppose the construction one is that's one of the reasons we're considering another consultation. So we're just trying to work out how best that could work if we could fit it in, and how best we could represent the information meaningfully. And we need to think about the sort of the visualization piece, but and we can come back to you on that one. Obviously we've got some nice pictures of some nice structures. What we now need to do is get some meaningful views from locations that you guys feel are valuable, and I think that's probably where we've got a gap, and we need to work it.
Does that answer the question for you, Robert?
It's answered one part on the construction phase. What about the areas on the route that passes near to the housing?
I said we need to work that. We'll take that away and come back to you on that.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise you were answering both questions with one answer. Thank you.
Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've just got one question I forgot to ask earlier, but can I just really echo what Laura said and what Robert said? It's really, really important that we get these details ahead of time now. And obviously, if you are sharing, if you want to show that you are being more cooperative, certainly we need them as soon as possible before the resubmission of the VCO. But my question was about bridle ways. We've got a very large and a very keen, very enthusiastic horse riding community within Thurrock, and hardly any bridle ways. So I heard you talk about pathways, Claire, but nothing about bridle ways. Of course, a bridle way can be used by any non-motorised user, so walkers, even people in wheelchairs. Actually, it's probably better to have a bridle way than it is to have a pathway for many people in terms of access.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, are there plans for bridle ways, or is it just pathways?
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole other presentation on public rights of way that we could spend, an hour talking about. But generally, as well as linking up the broken network, we're generally upgrading pathways to bridle ways or shared surface, so that it can be used by pedestrians, cyclists, and equestrians. So if we're having an impact on something, it's generally being upgraded to bridle way standard. The only caveat to that is that some places we have had quite conversations with the landowners about antisocial use, and particularly of quad bikes on some of those routes. So we are looking potentially at access control mechanisms to make sure that while people in wheelchairs and equestrians can get access to the network, you're not making it possible for dirt bikes and quad bikes to get access to that. So there'll be a bit more detailed design required to make sure we get that right.
Great, thank you very much.
Just jumping in there, I think there's a couple of you've raised the same sort of question, which is around social value, public amenity, and as Claire says, we've done quite a lot of work on bridleways and other areas. So it just feels like we could pull together a relatively snappy. I'm looking at Claire, hopefully, snappy summation of where we've got to on that sort of social value, social amenity, public bridleways, etc., which I think would be helpful. It would certainly you'd start to see what we're talking about. So I suggest we'll take that as an action, and then we can decide how best we share it with you, whether we just send it to you or whether you want us to present it.
Can I just jump in, Councillor Messi? I think that's a great idea, Matt. It probably needs to be linked into the green infrastructure proposals that you've also got that you may or may not be aware of, which might help. Is it Councillor Spillman's questions about landscape to be more understood in a much wider context. So that could come forward possibly at the next task force. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah. If I can jump in as well, following on, I've been dealing with the wider sort of green infrastructure, including the rights of way improvements throughout the process. And certainly one of the things we've been working on is not only the upgrades, as Claire suggested, but one of the key things is when you get to sections of road, such as the Muckingford Road, North Road, is how the links along those roads to make sure that if you've got horse riders or cyclists, as well as walkers, there's safe routes to link to the new sections of Bridal Way, so that we're reasonably now have a route in effect which runs from the Thames Chase centre near Upminster through to Coalhouse Fort, and the issue now is how we can get the spurs off of that sort of to start forming a proper network.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Mulcahy? Oh, brilliant, thank you.
It does, thank you, and I'll be delighted to see that green infrastructure presentation come, especially if it's to the next meeting.
Yeah, I think we're all appreciative of the extra level of detail that we've seen tonight, and I know there's a fair few more questions. So, Lucy, who was next, please?
We've got Councillor Allen and then Councillor Rice left.
Councillor Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question would probably be best aimed at Gary, and it's regarding the Tilbury Link Road. So basically the question is, why has the Link Road been taken out of the proposals? Is it merely because it blows the budget? Because it would suggest that the Link Road would alleviate traffic movements from the other Highways England Road, which is the A1089, the Dock Approach Road, which we know that the Asda roundabout is currently on its 19,000 vehicle movements per 24 hours. So I would have thought that the Link Road would have taken quite a lot of movements off of the 1089, which would have been a good thing. So if you could answer that question, why the Link Road was taken out of the proposals. Thank you.
The Link Road actually was never. What it happened was, it was back in, I think it was November 2019. It was included in a scoping document that went off to PINS, and it was an option that we were looking at that stage, and we hadn't completed all our work on where the traffic was going to flow on local roads and everything like that. So we in completing the work, what happened was, because we were trying to simplify the A13 junction, and by taking felt by taking those two movements out, it would actually help. But we found that it didn't in the end, and so we then, because we wanted to remove the connection at the Brentford Road because of the connection to the A13 at Horsett Cock, because it meant there would be quite a large scale flyover having to go across the top to take the movement from LTC North going eastbound on the A13. And so what we did was, in developing the scheme, the compromise was that we actually put the links that we needed at the A13 junction, but the Tilbury link, we decided not to put it in there because it was going to get inappropriate traffic on it, or traffic on inappropriate roads, and that's one of the reasons that we actually removed it. It's still, what I will say, it is still being looked at in RIS 2 and potentially in RIS 3 of the future programme with Highways England.
If I could just come back on that, Chair, with terms of inappropriate traffic now, like I said, regarding the Asda roundabout that's currently on 19,000 vehicle movements per 24-hour capita, I do believe. What improvements will be put in as the roundabout to alleviate the the future traffic that we're going to be having go through and use the Highways England A1089 road?
So I'll jump in here, Gary. So we are looking at a sort of basket of other road schemes. This is the sort of, again, the advantage of changing the organisation at Highways England. So we're not only is the LTC going on, we're also looking to see what happens more broadly. So Asda Roundabout is one of those things that we're trying to look at and understand what else do we need to do on the network. But yeah, the list is relatively short, but there are a number of projects, and as Gary says, the link road is under development by a separate project team, and it's got money to do that right now. It will then be brought forward as with any other scheme to see if we can fund it in RIS3, which is in 4 years' time. So we are working them, and as the roundabout, similarly, we are trying to understand how best to bring that one forward. So there's a number of schemes that we are trying to bring forward over and above what sits around the Lower Thames crossing.
With the greatest of respects, Matt and Gary, it just appears that we've got promises of jam tomorrow.
Yep, completely recognise that. And until we actually get something going on the ground, you won't feel any different to that. So the challenge is on us, isn't it? But I do recognise that must be how it feels.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Rice.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Perhaps this is best directed at Matt. At West Tilbury, you've always had this idea to go over the railway rather than underneath the railway. For the life of me, I can't understand why, because as you come out of the tunnel around the Tilbury area, the land starts to rise. And of course, what happens as you get round to West Tilbury, the land rises even higher. So you've got to have some very ingenious lorries, because they're going to come to a stuttering halt. Because what's going to happen is, as they come up on this incline, they'll be coming down gears rather than just pushing forward. And I'm at a loss where it cannot go underneath the railway and then just straight up onto the road, which would be a less of a barrier to probably lorry drivers. I don't think it matters too much on cars, but lorry drivers can't keep going up and down, if you understand where I'm coming from. And to actually have a bridge that's going to have in effect, it's 20 foot above ground level. Now, 20 foot above ground level, you can call it 6 metres, but people with old money probably understand 20 feet. That's a hell of a high distance. And it's another distance that heavy goods vehicles are going to have to chase up. So I would still employ today that you might look at taking the road underneath the railway line, not over the top of it. And of course, the other thing to mention is the scar on the landscape, because you will bring another scar.
So I think, so you cut out at the end there. But I've just actually, oddly enough, when I first stood at on the bank of the Thames and looked, sort of north, it was my first question to the team was, why aren't we going over? And the simple answer is we'd end up with an incredibly long tunnel, which to some extent would be almost unfeasible. In that we're already 4 kilometres long in terms of going underneath the Thames and coming out the other side. We'd almost double that. So then the next question, which you rightly say, is what about trucks? I asked that same question to the team when I first turned up. The reality is the route is of a standard such that trucks can will be fine on it. It'll be in line with every other standard we've got across the network, so it'll be fine in terms of fitting in with the rest of the network. Yeah, it's a sort of obvious question when you look at it, but the problem is you end up pushing the tunnel so low down that you struggle. It goes on and on and on, and you end up with a very, very long tunnel. And so and at that point, this is where cost and impact sort of starts to hit. So what we've ended up with is the best compromise solution that will work for the road. And and we're trying to what we're trying to do here is, and we're talking about, is mitigation along that route. But it's a very obvious question. You're right.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can come back to is what Councillor Allen said at the start of proceedings. Obviously it's going to be a toll road. The tolls are going to be phenomenal because the income generation will be there. It just doesn't sit right to me that as you look up from Tilbury, the land goes up quite dramatically. It's not a small incline, and I'm just surprised that for more duration that we don't put it underneath the railway. I hear your argument about how long a tunnel might be, but at the end of the day, it's far better to have that facility rather than have HGVs having to be stuck in third gear, trying to coax themselves up yet another incline. That's where I'm looking at it from. And I'm just amazed that we haven't thought seriously about going underneath the railway rather than on the top, because as I say, when we go over it, we do have another blot on the landscape. The other thing we must bear in mind, Matt, is that you've only got West Tilbury, which is down the road, which is a very ancient village that should be protected. And having a 20-foot bridge, it just doesn't ring true to me, and I just like you to have another look at it, perhaps, because I think it's well worth looking at.
Why don't we give you a written response on it? That might be the sort of quickest way to do it. But yeah, let's do that.
Okay, jolly good.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Matt and his team?
There aren't any more hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think what you've come tonight, guys, is really good. It's really welcomed by the task force. Like I said earlier, the level of detail is beyond what I was expecting. And then looking at things as well, like the baseline design for the Mardik and Ossett Fen viaduct compared to the enhanced design, it's miles ahead. So yeah, thank you very much for the design on that, Claire. I think it looks a lot better. I think we're all been talking about things like biodiversity, trees and a number of trees, rights of way, health impact, bridle ways, and if you'll be welcome to come back to task force and give us similar levels of detail we've seen tonight on those subjects. It'd be very welcome.
Yep, no, we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, we'd welcome a sort of, if we maybe set up a series of topics that we pull off over time and work you through. That'd be really good.
Brilliant. Well, if there's no further questions from the committee, then I'll thank you very much for your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just give people time to leave the meeting virtually. We've got a couple more points on the agenda this evening. I'm going, because it's coming up really for 8 p.m. It might be better now that if I'd like to move a motion without notice to suspend Council Procedure Rule 11.1 to allow the meeting to continue beyond the 2.5-hour time limit. I would have thought we'd probably need another 45 minutes. Would anyone really second that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, the A303 legal challenge, which is a verbal update with Anna Eastgate to present.
Thank you, Chair. There is no update at the moment on the A303. They've launched their proceedings, but there's nothing that's been reported since December the 20th. So there is nothing to update on that, but we'll continue to update you as and when things emerge.
We might not have needed that extension after all. So, but has anyone got any questions for Anna? Bearing in mind there has been no update since December. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate this isn't directly A303, but I just wondered if any further consideration had been given to having any updates or possible Transport Action Network giving an update of any sort. You said last time that it would be discussed to see whether or not that would fall within the remit of the group, and I wondered if that had any further update for us, please.
So I had a discussion with the head of Democratic Services. It doesn't really fit within the terms of reference of this meeting, but I think it warrants potentially a separate discussion with the chair of the meeting, Laura. So we'll maybe report back next time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Muldowney.
Just picking up on that point, can you say why it doesn't fall within the scope of the meeting? Because I'm sort of at a loss. It is connected to what we're trying to do here, and it would be handy to have an update from them and the work that they've been doing, especially the work that they've been doing trying to get the update in regards to the CO2 levels and the PM 2.5. So I'm a little bit left wondering why you say it's not relevant.
I didn't say it wasn't relevant, Councillor Muldowney. I said that it didn't really fit squarely within the terms of reference for the Lower Thames crossing, but I'm quite happy to have a separate conversation offline with the chair.
Okay, thank you.
Can't see any further hands raised for that agenda item, so we'll move on. Probably need a little bit more time for this one. It's agenda item 7, which is the economic mitigation list with Anna Eastgate to present, and I think we'll have a fair few things to add to it, Anna, after tonight. Over to you.
Okay, well, the update on the mitigation list is that we're due to publish the public-facing summary, non-technical summary, within the next 2 weeks. So adding to the list may be something that we pick up separately later, but it certainly isn't going to be something we're going to have time to capture and include in the document to be published, or indeed the full technical review and report that's been produced that will be circulated as part of that summary. Next steps with Highways England is really to understand from them what of those 57 items they are prepared to include. We haven't had a formal written response from them yet. Then we can identify what items they are not considering or are not built into the DCO proposals as yet, and then we need to have a conversation about how we take them forward and how we prioritise them. And I envisage at that point, if there's anything to add to it, then that's the point at which we would add. So that's kind of currently where we are, but probably the mitigation list will be something that's added to at each meeting and discussed at each meeting to provide an update, Chair. Yep,
that's absolutely fine. I mean, the 27, they seem, Matt seemed quite open for saying that be able to provide that, not a problem. So yeah, we can bring that back to the next meeting of the task force, and then we can go from there and build on this. Do any members of the committee have any questions regarding the economic mitigation list? Councillor Muldowney.
I just want to make sure, I know I've said it before and at other meetings as well, can L16 please be updated to, was it L16? No, it's L15, I beg your pardon. Please be updated to include, and it's Wickham, Wickham fields, and also Heath, as promised, I think a couple of meetings ago.
They have included, Councillor Muldowney. They were included when you mentioned them the first time. It's just that we haven't circulated an updated document yet.
Okay, but just to clarify that the document that's online for this meeting isn't updated.
No, we are about to publish the updated document, Councillor Muldowney.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the one, Anna, that'll be coming in the next 2 weeks.
Yes, and task force members will be given a copy of the documents as a priority.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Any other?
Just to confirm, Councillor, the full report does have the correct stuff in it, as I think I mentioned at the last meeting, Councillor Muldowney.
It's not been circulated to members though, Chris.
It hasn't, but it's definitely in there because I made very sure it was because of your comments at the last meeting. So it's just a lack of circulation at present.
Thank you for that, Chris. That's why I was so surprised that it wasn't updated in our document that was circulated today. But thank you for doing that.
Don't see any other hands raised. Lucy, could you see this?
No, there's no other hands raised.
No hands raised at the moment. I mean, Anna, just off the back of this, would it be possible to ask Highways England in terms of biodiversity and trees? It seems like they're going to have people on these teams that would we haven't had at task force before, and the question seems to come up each meeting. Steve Plum's raised hand, so you might have an answer for this one.
Steve's working really closely with the team. Just to give a bit of context, you know, it comes back to the point I made before that this is an iterative process, and you know, if you think of it in terms of layers, you know, you have to start somewhere and build the layers up until you get the complete picture. And even when we get DCO consent, or when Highways England get DCO consent and it's issued and we see it, that will not be the final layer. The final layers will come through the discharge of requirements, and that won't be until they're about to start construction. So I appreciate and understand that members want to see the information, but in many respects, that level of information isn't there yet. And that, you know, it's symptomatic of the process. It's the way it is. You know, it's not like a planning application where the full amount of detail is submitted. It isn't like that. And Highways England only have to produce a bare level of design information. The stuff you've seen tonight on the design of the structures is more than they need to submit to get DCO consent for it, believe it or not. It's just that we are working with them in the background to get that level of information. So I'll say it again, you know, the needs, I understand the thirst for knowledge and information, but there does need to be a level of patience to let the layers be worked upon and come forward. But anyway, I'll hand over to Steve.
Yeah, I think, as Anna said, you know, the problem we've got is that all along is the level of detail they're prepared to release, which has been incredibly frustrating. You know, when we've been asked to consider things like landscape and visual impact, if you don't know the size or the design of the structure, it's hard to provide that any meaningful comments. But what we're now working with the various landscape architects, ecologists, people like Claire, is really trying to sort of knit the various elements together, because you know, the landscape mitigation works, the biodiversity gains, things, the public health, you know, improved recreational provision. It's trying to make sure that all the various elements knit together, whether it's mitigation, legacy, and also using various projects as a sort of springboard towards other initiatives. So we're sort of very busy in the background, sort of trying to pull the strands as close together as we can.
Councillor Massey, if I could just add to what Anna said, just as an explanation for those that aren't familiar with DCOs. The design that goes into a DCO examination and comes out at the other end of the grant, generally speaking, is somewhere between 20 and 30% of the final design only. And then the contractor's appointed, They go through a whole series of conditions that they have to fulfill and gradually layer up more and more of that design. And we'll obviously be bidding to have much more control over that process. But you've got to understand that the design that we get right now is at a certain level. And what we're trying to make sure is that somehow the things that we want, that you want, are actually captured and secured in the DCO. It's the securing process to make sure that things like those design principles are actually sufficiently detailed and robust that the contractor can't change them by making it cheaper at a later stage. So this process will go on for years, I'm afraid. It's just the nature of big development. It just is that way.
No, completely see where you're coming from, Chris and Steve, and completely agree. I think what it is, members in this committee, we've seen things that have been said, like cut and cover, changing of the route, and been told, no, that is off the table, so to speak, and it's not going to come back. So I think we're wary and want to make sure that anything we are taking forward is put in at the correct layer, and like you say, almost like ensured in, locked in, written in stone, that we're going to actually get
right
for the borough. Whether that's legacy or mitigation or any other benefit that is related to the Thames crossing. I think Councillor Spillman had his hand up.
No, I've put it down.
Okay, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if any other members are in agreement, but I think it's clear that Matt spoke about his team's perspective, and I do believe that their perspective is solely budget, coming in on budget with this crossing, and not overspending. And of course, our team, and I'll consider us as a team, representing the people of Thurrock. Our perspective is protecting Thurrock's environment, its ecology, and especially the people's health. And I think they're failing to look at it with that perspective, that, we are the ones who, live, work, rest, play and breathe Thurrock. Now, they, as we know, most of the senior officers and Highways England representatives, none of them live around here. So none of them are going to have to breathe the air that we breathe for many years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Was there a particular question or just?
No question, Chair. I'm just putting it. I'd like from some feedback from members if they agree that Matt, Gary, and his team's perspective is solely budget, bringing this Lower Thames crossing in on budget without any respect for Thurrock and its residents.
I'll still let Councillor Rice come in first, I think, because he wanted to respond to that. I don't know if he'll respond to you, Councillor Allen. Through me.
Yeah, I mean, I think Councillor Allen does have a good point. I mean, and the 2 points that I raised, and I don't think we got a satisfactory answer, was one at West Tilbury, why we're not going underneath the railway line rather than going 20 feet up in the air and having a blot on the landscape. And really, they didn't answer the question when we talked about the HGVs, because when that comes out of that tunnel from the bottom part of Tilbury, there's a tremendous climb. And, with the best will in the world, we're going to have hold-ups on that road because of that climb. And all you're going to do is, by putting that bridge up, you'll have another climb. Those are facts, Chair, and I think they need to be addressed. And I'll keep on about Chadwell and Alsett Heath. If that was moved further south, we could overcome the problems in that area, because we could actually get it away from people's properties. And when we talk about cut and cover, it's the only way to protect people's lungs. There is no other area, because with the greatest respect, when we come to trees, it could be 10 or 15 years before they're high enough to have any effect, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I think your main point there, I think they are going to come back to us in writing, which will be very welcome, because that'll be, like I said, again, levels of detail that we've not been privy to. So it'll be very interesting to see the reasons for that based on your question earlier. I think Laura Blake was next.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really just a statement to say that obviously, whilst I welcome the change in Highways England's approach to things, I also do have serious doubts on whether or not I actually can trust and believe at this stage, and I want to see some actions back up their words, because the words that I'm hearing in other public domains, particularly with Matt Palmer, do not match what he said today. BBC Kent the other day, he was particularly on about the fact that it's all systems go. We're going to be getting the new application back in very soon, whereas now he's telling us that they want to take the time, they want to listen, and they want to have discussions, and there's a possibility for further consultation, which is obviously all very welcome if they're actually going to back it up with actions. As we know previously, Highways England say one thing, depending on who they're talking to, and the actions don't always back it up. So it will be interesting to see whether they're actually going to start backing up all this chat with some actions.
Yep, point noted. It'd be, yeah, like I say, there's hope for something more positive going forward. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I echo what Laura said and what Councillor Rice has said, and also what Councillor Allen has said. I mean, it was nice to see more detail. Obviously, they've had to withdraw their DCO, and in order to resubmit it, they've suddenly woken up to the fact that it would be quite good if they actually cooperated with the areas, particularly with the areas that are most in opposition to the scheme. I think that's what we're seeing happening at the moment, which is all very well. But as I said at the beginning, you know, is it too late? They say we can't have cut and cover. I can't see how the health impacts, which, you know, we haven't had feedback on that yet, but I can only imagine what they are. I don't see how the health impacts can be mitigated if it isn't going to be some substantial mitigation like cut and cover. And looking at the A303 project, where it's all going into a tunnel to limit damage to a monument, I really still can't understand why that can't happen to protect our residents' health, particularly in Chadwell and other areas where the route goes so close to people's homes. So I understand that they've said no on that. Looking at the presentation tonight, it was, you know, they are obviously being more cooperative, but then they've had to withdraw their DCO and get a new team in to resubmit it because they haven't consulted properly, and they have been obstructive in the past. So they obviously needed to have a different approach. But when you look at what was actually presented tonight, we might be getting a few more bridleways. We're losing the view across the fens, even though I do agree that that design is better than it was before, and the detail that they're giving us is better than it was before. And we might get a few extra trees somewhere, but they might have been moved from somewhere else. So, you know, the net value of that compared to the potential health impacts and the potential environmental impacts, which I know we're going to get a report on soon, it's not really a net benefit to the area still. So I don't really see that we're, although I do like the new attitude, I don't really see that it's changed anything over much for Thurrock and its residents in terms of benefits.
Yeah, again, another very good point. I think we're just going to have to, like, this is a very long process. It sounds like although I think personally, sometimes we felt we're further along. We've been informed that it's got a long way to go. So hopefully we can have more of an influence for good aspects for residents of the borough, because it's going to be a long process. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right with the health impacts as well. And Lucy, has anyone else got their hand raised at all?
Councillor Allen, I think.
Is that from before, Councillor Allen?
No, mate, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with most of what Councillor Muldowney has said. Definitely, in terms of the impact assessments, the health impact assessment, surely this evidence that is going to be produced is going to be somewhat damning. It can't be good. And I'd like to ask Anna how far we've got along with how our professionals looking into to those impact assessments. How far have we got along with that?
Thank you, Chair. So we've got our technical team obviously reviewing all of the DCO documents. We have a weekly meeting to catch up with the team to work out where we are in light of that. At the moment, we're focusing on the lands work, so council-owned lands acquisitions, and also the development consent order itself. So we've allowed ourselves time to review the DCO documents. Highways England did originally say they wanted a response mid-January on some documents, so we're prioritising the documents that they wanted to see earliest, one of which is the transport assessment. But the intention is we'll have the review complete, ready to come back to task force in March, because that's what we've identified on the work programme. And just for clarity, the review of the DCO documents where it refers to the environmental impact assessment includes the health impact assessment, because the health impact assessment forms part of all of those DCO documents.
Thank you, Anna. Do you feel that that report, when it comes to light, when it comes to fruition, that it will be a damning report that is, is just simply not going to be very positive?
Not necessarily, no. And I think we've already had some disagreements between the view of professional officers and members in regards to various elements of this scheme. And it comes back to what we've talked about before, that there are standards associated with the environmental impact assessment. And whilst a road going round the back of Chadwell St Mary that doesn't exist now, but may exist in 10 years' time, will clearly have an impact on air quality, because there isn't a road there. There aren't vehicles going past there at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to breach the standards. And it's only when something has a significant environmental effect that Highways England has to mitigate it. So no, I don't agree, I'm afraid. And I don't think that all of the relevant environmental impacts associated with this scheme are going to have a detrimental impact on the borough. I think there's a perception more than a reality. And unfortunately, unless something breaches those standards, Highways England doesn't have to mitigate it. And that's the law of the land. It's not Highways England's fault. It's simply the law of the land, the same as any developer that submits an application for development proposals in our borough.
I like how you say that, Anna, our borough.
Well, I've always viewed it as our borough, Councillor Allen, and actually I care deeply about what happens in Thurrock. So the comments made this evening about officers who don't live in the borough not caring, I actually take quite offence to.
That's your prerogative.
Let's keep it professional, please, members. I know you might have a difference of opinion.
Sometimes I'm a little confused who Anna actually works for, because I don't think she really has the best interests of Thurrock's.
I think these comments need to be taken offline, because I really don't think it's appropriate for Councillor Allen to be making comments against officers in a public forum like this. I'm quite happy to have a conversation separately about it.
Yep, like I said, let's take that offline if you've got a difference of opinion on that one. Moving on to the work programme, item 8. which is included on pages 21 to 24 of the agenda. I know we've mentioned the health impact, which is going to come back as in the future. We haven't got a fixed date on that because obviously our public health team are very, very, very busy at the moment dealing with pandemics, which is understandable. So forgiven that, does any member have any further items they would like to be added?
Councillor Muldowney, I'll make sure that the work programme's amended where it talks about the DCO review for March to include specific reference to the health impact assessment. That wasn't anything other than we consider the health impact assessment as part of the EIA review.
Chair, it indicates that this health assessment's going to come back fine and dandy, you know.
Sorry, Councillor Muldowney was just coming back to Anna. Then I'll pick up on you, Councillor.
Thank you, Anna. You cut out a little bit, but I think you're saying that it's going to come back on the work programme as part of the environmental impact assessment. Is that right?
Exactly that.
Thank you.
I'll make sure that it's specifically referenced in there to avoid confusion.
Thank you. Obviously, should I write to you separately about the Transport Action Network? Chair, as you're going to discuss that with Anna.
Yep, I'm happy for that. Thank you, Councillor. Is any other questions regarding the work programme? Just to pick up on the point you made earlier, Councillor, and we are going to obviously have the health impact assessment on the work programme as soon as possible, and there'll be a lot of time then to discuss the health impacts on the borough. So it'll definitely be coming.
I understand that, Chair, but as Anna says, it would indicate that you know that this impact assessment is going to come back, you know, in its form without any real concern to anyone. And you know, I believe that if it does come back positive, then it's lies.
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see what the details are of that. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. As we've got a new person in charge of Highways England, it might be appropriate when we next get them back, whether it's next month or March, whenever, that we do have an item on our agenda about cut and cover, because we know the old history. We might even twist their arms to actually do something this time.
Councillor Rice, I'd be happy to see if you'd include it on the written reply along with the details about the lorries and the undulation of the road. So we see if you'd reply to that about cut and cover.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Laura Blake.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that obviously I believe that Anna and the team have got the pretty much DCO documentation that they are having to work through now, and knowing how we felt as a group of facing that daunting task, I just want to say hats off and thank you for the work that you are doing on that in the meantime, and I look forward to hearing anything that you can report on as and when you do get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else got their hand up, Lucy, before we...
Councillor Allen still got his hand up.
Assuming that's an old hand, Councillor Allen? Yeah. No, don't think he's an old hand or not coming back. Okay.
Chair, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir.
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
Hand up. I thought.
Mute. No. From the moment the LTC task force was born many moons ago, I can remember when Highways England come in and we started to, you know, cross-examine their proposals. And from the word go, Chair, they said that they wouldn't be, you know, we couldn't sort of challenge their you know, their proposals. You know, they weren't going to sort of listen. And although we've got a new guy at the helm now with Matt. I think it's still very much going to play out as it did from the onset. You know, from the word go. That we can't, change their minds at all. Their minds are set, and that's how it's going to be.
I think, in a way, Councillor Allen, they've obviously gone attempted DCO submission and realised that they need to provide a better level of detail. And this, in a way, nights like tonight are providing better level of detail. And hopefully, going forward, we can get some of the things we've been talking about this evening on the drawing board. Things that are already in the list that we've been discussing for months on end. So it's things that we can take forward because they know they have to do a bit more to get this over the line. So I want to stay positive. I don't want to just say, well, let's just let Highways England do what they want. I think this is why we're here, to hold them to account and best for the residents of Thurrock. And I think that we should carry on doing that in the most positive way possible.
Absolutely, I agree, but I still feel that they're going to do it their way, and although they seem to be listening a little bit more to us, but I still feel that their sole objective is to bring this LTC, the Lower Thames Crossing, within budget, and despite what we say to them, Chair.
Okay. Maybe we can pick up on this on a pre-brief in next month's meeting and go through some of the details of that. Because I think for just talking about the work programme, it's probably not the right place in the agenda to be talking about the motives of Highways England. But I think Peter Ward had his hand up briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. I think the reason that Lower Thames Crossing withdrew their DCO application, I think, is in a large part due to the fact that the consultation certainly is one of the points where they hadn't got that right. There were 3 or 4 other points that they also had to address. There were issues in how they've dealt with the interactions on the river, for example, which we're dealing with them as a port, because the tunnel depth is quite important in terms of future provision for vessel sizes and all of those types of things in terms of future-proofing the port. So that's quite important. They also got pulled up on their construction traffic. As I said earlier, one of the key things on construction is to make sure they utilise local business, local facilities that are available that can have a significant impact on that, because construction will be a very big impactor on this to everybody that lives in Thurrock. Not just the local residents, to everyone, with the amount of traffic that they're putting potentially onto the road. So anything that they can do to mitigate that will be significant. And I'd just like to say, I think a lot of the thing around consultation is a lot of the hard work that Anna and the team have done in terms of going back to Highways England constantly about their inability to consult properly. So I think, I'd take my hat off to Anna and the team on that, and I think that's partly why we're in the position where we have got a withdrawn DCO temporarily, but it will go back in. And who's to say when it will go back in? My own view is it will probably go back in sometime in September this year as another application. And between now and then, the only thing that I would urge everybody on this committee particularly is to make sure that we take advantage of mitigation and all of the points that have been made tonight around getting improvements. This is the time where you can influence the DCO before it goes in. Once it goes in, it's much harder to change that. So I really would urge, having done a DCO myself, it is around making sure that we get as much mitigation into this scheme as possible and that we get as much for Thurrock out of it as possible. That's across a broad range of things, local resident benefits as well as business benefits, all of the type of things that we can try and extract from them whilst we've got an opportunity to do so. So I'd just sort of like to make that point, really.
No, thank you, Peter. It is appreciated. I think any opportunities we've got to engage with Highways England, we've got to sort of grasp with both hands at the moment, because like you say, there is going to be a DCO coming along.
Chair,
Sorry,
can I
Anne.
just put in there, because I just want to supplement something that Peter said there, because he's absolutely right in terms of the approach. But what I would on the side of is trying to seek to change the scheme so fundamentally that it becomes a different scheme to what it is, because we will not succeed in that. So more cut and cover, moving the tunnel underneath the Tilbury Loop line is a fundamentally different scheme to the scheme that Highways England has developed so far. And I mean, maybe Chris has got a comment to make on this, but I would suggest, so don't just take my opinion, I would suggest that that is not something that we are going to be able to influence and succeed in influencing. So we have to look at what we can influence and what we can secure. And it's my professional view that cut and cover and moving the tunnel beyond the railway line is not something that is within either the contemplation of Highways England or their gift at this point in time with the scheme. Chris, have you got anything to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth everyone having another read of the cut and cover paper. I was actually at LTC when that was prepared, so I was heavily involved in it. And whilst not trying to defend it right now, it does demonstrate that there is actually quite a lot of cut and cover built into the scheme already. And in addition to that, there is what's called false cuttings, where they literally cut the ground in order to sink the road below an existing ground level. And that plus the tunnelling, and okay, the Tilbury Viaduct and the Mardik Orsett Fen Viaduct are raised up, I get that, as is the area around the M25. But actually, there's quite a lot of mitigation already built into that. And cut and cover is not the panacea that everyone seems to think it is, because if you do cut and cover, you have to cut through an enormous width of land in order to create the cut and cover. So in other words, the area you're working in becomes 2 or 3 times the width that it would do had you carried it on at ground level, or more or less ground level. So I think, and that was analysed in a map and annotated to show precisely whether there was cut and cover already, whether there was tunnelling, whether there was a viaduct or false cutting, right the way through the route. So it was demonstrated pretty clearly you couldn't do it. And honestly, it just is impractical, let alone, I mean, it creates more environmental effects, and yes, it costs more. And there's just no way they could justify it. And in terms of the road going underneath the Tilbury Loop line, that would mean that the tunnel construction site, the major construction site, would be located very, very close to properties on the northern side of the loop line. And yes, you might get away with the gradients, but they've obviously looked at the gradients and they clearly think that they can get HGVs up and down them as necessary. So I mean, it's entirely up to you guys, because it's your decision, but the energies that you've all got, and there's lots of them clearly from today, would be, in my view, be better spent focusing on the other levels of mitigation, the green infrastructure, the footpath network, the bridleway network, getting as many of those 57 mitigation items as you can possibly get. And the fact that they've already got half of them built in, I mean, I've yet to go through that with them to find out exactly how they've done that. And I'll be scrutinising it very carefully before we present it to you. But they've already offered consideration of a bridge over the Tilbury Loop line, which satisfies your local plan aspirations and is probably going to cost them £5 to £10 million more. And that's not a small thing. And that's a massive change. So it's that kind of thing I would focus on rather than those two. But it's entirely up to you. That's just an opinion.
Thank you very much. I think it's always good to hear from people who know a bit more about this than we do in terms of the actual numbers. And
well, knowing about it doesn't necessarily make it a valid view. I mean, you're the ones that have to live with it, like Councillor Allen says. So all we can do is advise.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think Councillor Rice is the last question. Or is that an old hand?
I was just going to say, Chair, I appreciate what Chris has said and Anna, but at the end of the day, we are the politicians, and if Highways England have got a new lease of life that they might be a bit kinder to us, then we ought to try and screw them into the ground. When it comes to the West Tilbury line, I've never seen that myself, why they go above it rather than underneath. I've never seen it. And if it costs them a few more pennies, well, hard luck, because at the end of the day, the government will get all this money back in tolls. And it's the same with cut and cover. I don't really care how much it costs. I'm interested in the welfare of the residents I represent. That's what we're interested in. And certainly, you know, you can have, and let us just look at it very briefly. Look at the A13. My late father was on the public inquiry, and one of the things they got at Stiffer Clays was that big dip in the road. But that does very little to hide the noise from the residents of Stiffer Clays. I lived in Chestnut Avenue, and I could hear that quite openly of an evening. So going down a bit further is not going to muscle the noise, Chris. And, you know, but that's from a practical point. I just look at it, if we have the opportunity to actually coerce Highways England to do a bit more, then that's what we should try and do. I mean, as for green footpaths, and I'll be quite honest with you, why would you want to walk alongside a 6-lane motorway? That's my own opinion. I don't see that. I'd much prefer to see that cut and cover and, you know, the tunnel underneath the railway line, because I see them very practical ideas. I know it'll cost them money, but at the end of the day, the government will get this money back. It's not an empty, it's not a one-way traffic. That's the way I feel.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I think there's lots of things to take on board and to discuss. I don't, like I say, we're talking about the work programme at the minute, so it's hard to know where to put them. I think perhaps we could have a meeting offline before the next meeting and bring some of these ideas together. But like I say, happy when the written reply. Hopefully, we can get Matt to include some reasons as well about why he looked at cut and cover and doesn't feel it's appropriate. And if it is something that you'd ever look at again, at least they will tell us then.
Chair, can I just ask Chris a question, please?
Yes, Councillor.
Chris, in terms of, I think you've elaborated a bit on in terms of the influencing Highways England. Now, you mentioned the 57 mitigation items. Do you feel that's where our influence can come?
Yes, I do. I mean, thanks to Anna, back probably near a year ago, that two-stage process, one with the economic costs of the scheme, which frightened everybody with the huge numbers involved, and now with the positive side of things, setting out those measures, it clearly sets out what the council's trying to achieve. And I'd be surprised if there's anything on top of that list that can practically be added to it. I mean, you could add putting the thing under the railway, but it's a case of whether it's a practical suggestion that they'll bother to take on board. So, I mean, a number of those measures are cast pretty widely, and I know they cover the things that you seem to be quite interested in, quite rightly, which is all about green infrastructure, footpaths, and all the rest of it. That's well covered under there, and I would imagine that they'll change the scheme quite dramatically about that to cover some of those comments. So I think that's where we should put our eggs in the basket, if you like.
Lovely, thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Just to add, sorry, Councillor, just to add to that, I mean that's the measures that the council is publicly going out with to say this is what we're after. But I mean, in addition, the officers, myself, Anna, and all the team will be making sure that all the comments that we've made on all the various technical documents are properly dealt with and amendments are made. And like I said before, a lot of the measures that we don't have any detail about are actually secured and given us control over for the future. So in other words, we protect ourselves by going through that sort of separate technical process, which we can report back to you on. But it gives you some surety that we've actually got some control over the future then.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Muldowney, see your hand. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to echo what many of us have said about Anna and Chris and the team. I mean, there's no doubt that their replies to the consultations, I mean, the supplementary consultation, the reply to that was about 500 pages long, I think, and the detail that they went into and all the hard work of the team we should definitely recognise that. And I echo my other colleagues who've said hats off to you. I definitely see us working as a team, with each of us bringing different elements to holding Highways England to account. Having said that, I don't think it's an either-or situation about the 57 mitigations that the council's putting forward, although I do actually think that that's a really good piece of work as well, and maybe pushing a little bit on cut and cover now, especially now we've got new management, as it were, new leadership of the project. There's certainly no harm, I think, in pushing some of those things again, and as well as making sure that we're pushing for the other mitigation as well. So I don't really see that it's an either or. I think it's both and I think between us we all did a good job of that tonight on both counts, as far as we were able with the detail that we were given. So yeah, it sounds as if Highways England are willing to come back maybe even next month and talk about some other aspects of the scheme. If that's so, then I will start to believe them a little bit more about their change in attitude, and that's something to be welcomed. And obviously I'll keep an open mind and keep listening to what's being offered, but also I'm going to keep pushing, particularly in terms of the health of residents and the impact of this scheme on them, but also the impact on the area economically, because I mean we saw from our original report that it was going to have quite a devastating economic effect as well as a health effect. So I think we should keep pushing on all fronts, you know, and nothing should be ruled off the table, really. I mean, they can always say no again. You know, it's not going to do any harm, is it? But yeah, to finish on a positive note, I think between us all this evening, we did a good job as a team to hold Highways England to account, and it's good to see a bit more information coming from Highways England after all the many months of nothing whatsoever coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to bring this meeting to a close. We have got some positives to take forward. Thank you very much for all the officers for the hard work they've put in recently on this. I know it's not been easy and not the easiest circumstances, so we do appreciate the work you do on behalf of the council. Thank you very much, task force members. As always, you brought some interesting questions, and we've got some new questions going forward. So thank you very much for that. It's been never a short meeting when Highways England come to visit. So appreciate you staying alert and keeping with us till the end. And that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I'll now declare the meeting closed at 8:45 p.m. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'll convey